There have been 50 years and 9 generations of video game consoles. In those 50 years, many different companies have risen and fallen in the industry. Some have stood the test of time and continue to put out great consoles, while others have died out early on in their lifetime. I will be going over each company's best console throughout the years. While Magnavox made the Odyssey, which was the first gaming console ever, Atari was the first to become very popular, and people still know Atari today. This one is not a hard choice, because Atari only truly had one amazing console, which was the Atari 2600. This is the only console made by Atari that truly has a legacy, and the only popular one. While the Atari 2600 sold 30 million units, the 5200 sold less than 1 million, the 7800 sold less than 4 million, and the Atari Jaguar sold less than 150,000. The Atari 2600 also had an amazing library of retro games, most of which were arcade games popular at the time. Some of these include Pong, Dig Dug, and Centipede. Overall, the Atari 2600 is great, and is Atari's best console. But what is Nintendo's best console? This is a much harder choice, because Nintendo has dominated the gaming industry for over 40 years. Arguments for all of their consoles, except the Virtual Boy, can be made for why they are the best console of all time. On one hand, you could say the NES or the Game Boy, which revolutionized gaming and brought the gaming industry out of a depression. On the other hand, you could say more modern consoles like the Wii and the Switch, because they had innovative gimmicks that no other consoles at the time had. Personally, I would say either the SNES or the Nintendo Switch. The SNES had some of the best 2D games of all time published on it. Super Mario World, The Legend of Zelda, A Link to the Past, and even the first Mario Kart ever, just to name a few. Its controller paved the way for modern controllers that we know today, and it technically gave birth to PlayStation. More on that later. The Super Nintendo's lifespan gave birth to one of the first cases of console wars with the Sega Genesis. Sega was marketed towards the more hardcore gamer and had Sonic, while Nintendo was marketed towards the more casual gamer, with Mario competing against Sonic. The Nintendo Switch is also home to some of the greatest games of all time. Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, Mario Odyssey, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, and Mario Kart 8 Deluxe are just some of the exclusives to Nintendo Switch. The Switch is amazing because you can use it both as a handheld and as a home console. This is likely why it is projected to become one of the most selling video game consoles of all time, next to the PS2 and Nintendo DS. The reason why I wouldn't say the Wii is the best Nintendo console of all time is all the crappy games put onto it, which I don't have any of. Never mind. So which is better, the SNES or the Switch? It has the amazing library that the SNES has, but you can take it everywhere and play more modern games on it. Next up, we have Sega. Sega's downfall in the gaming industry is notorious, but not as bad as Atari's. Unlike the Atari 2600, the Genesis has some competition. The Dreamcast and the Saturn are both fairly recognizable consoles and have a bunch of hidden gems in their game libraries. However, the Genesis is extremely iconic and gave birth to Sonic. Like I said about the Super Nintendo, the Sega Genesis sparked one of the first examples of console wars. For these reasons, the Sega Genesis deserves to be remembered as the best Sega console of all time. Personally, I think it would be cool if Sega released another console, just like you should subscribe. Next we have PlayStation, the video game company created when Nintendo and Sony couldn't agree over a deal. Nintendo was working with Sony for a CD add-on for the SNES, but Sony wanted all the royalties for the games made on the add-on. They couldn't agree on a deal, so Sony decided to make it their own. This gave birth to the PlayStation, one of the most successful video game consoles ever created. It is extremely hard to decide which is the best PlayStation console, because all of them have been superb. All of them have reasons for being the best, but I think our main contenders here are the PS1, PS2, and PS3. The PS1 was the first to use compact discs and was a huge success. The PS2 was the highest selling video game console of all time, and the PS3, depending on the model, had backwards compatibility for both those consoles. If we had to choose between those three, however, I would choose the PS3. It had so many great games released for it, and on top of that, you could play PS1 and PS2 games. The PS3 Slim models didn't have PS2 backwards compatibility, but a lot of those games were released again on the PS3 or on the PS3 eShop. Also, I feel like the PS3 just holds up better today because it is far more modern compared to the PS1 and PS2. That may be biased because I own one, but in general, I think PS3 is the best PlayStation console. Next up, we have a company that has never won a generation, Xbox. This one definitely boils down to the original Xbox and the Xbox 360 because of all the problems with the Xbox One and Xbox Series X. Both are great consoles, but I would say the Xbox 360 beats the original Xbox. It was the Xbox console that came closest to winning its generation, and for good reason. Like the PS3, it had a great lineup of games, and still holds up well to this day. It had backwards compatibility with the original Xbox, which was a great feature. Along with this, it had some of the best exclusives out of any Xbox console, which really shows in the sales. It had a few issues, like the red ring of death, and Microsoft slacking off at the end of the Xbox 360's lifespan. Bye.